Hello, good morning and welcome to Unacademy IAS, a one-stop destination for all the English medium civil services aspirants. Welcome to another session of the Hindu News Analysis dated 7th September 2024. Now, let me show you the list of the topics that I will be covering today. The topics span from the polity, economics, science and technology and other important, let's say, ecology and environment related topics. The curated topics that I am going to take up are spreading throughout all the major subjects of the GS papers for your prelims as well as mains examination, because the objective of this initiative is to ensure that all your current affairs requirements are taken care of. So, if you like this initiative, please do hit the like button, and more importantly, if you're yet to subscribe to our YouTube channel, kindly do it now. So, totally 9 articles, some of them, couple of them, that is the first 3 to 4 articles are relevant for mains examination. Having said so, I will be discussing certain important concepts which are relevant even for prelims. So, apart from that, the next 4 to 5 articles are relevant for preliminary examination. But before I start the discussion, listen to a very important announcement. Starting today, we are happy to launch Success in Prelims Initiative, SIP. Not the SIP in the financial market, but the SIP for your assistance in the preparation. This is a weekly current affairs test series, and this is available to you starting today every Saturday on the Unacademy platform. For this, what you need to do? Simply register. That's it. Register, and every Saturday we promise to bring to you 30 MCQs which you can solve in 1 hour and basically get prepared well for the current affairs for the upcoming civil services examination. It is free of a cost. You do not have to pay anything. All you need to do is simply register on the platform. Now, let me start the discussion with 2 editorials today, Hindu newspaper. First one is basically an article which has been written by a very well-known economic expert, Mr. C. Rangarajan, as well as D.K. Srivatsava, who are talking about the fiscal prudence and why should Government of India as well as the state governments stick to the fiscal deficit target. What are the important points here? Let's understand it. Point number 1, Government of India back in the year 2003 introduced a reform by the name of FRBM, Fiscal Responsibility Budget Management Act. Under the FRBM, Government of India targeted the fiscal deficit as well as revenue deficit. And the argument was, by targeting the fiscal deficit and revenue deficit, we will improve the fiscal prudence or the quality of financing of Government of India. Now, many of you will ask me, sir, what do you mean by the term fiscal prudence? Remember these 2 terminologies. One is a fiscal prudence and the second one is called as fiscal profligacy. Fiscal prudence and fiscal profligacy. What is the important difference between both of them? Whenever the Government of India's, or for that matter even the state government's finances, the policies or the measures related to finances are sustainable in nature. That is, it is not going to cause a disaster in terms of the financial health of the state or the center. Such policies are referred to as fiscal prudence policies. And on the other hand, if the policies of the government are going to lead to deterioration or basically bad financial health of the states or the center, such policies are referred to as fiscal profligacy. So, the argument of the Government of India was, we need to control the expenditure. We need to control how much money we are borrowing so that the future generations later will not bear the burden of our decision making today. And that is the precise reason under the 2003 Act of FRBM, the government set up a target of having 3% fiscal deficit target and a 0% revenue deficit target. And if you are wondering, sir, why 0, why 3? If you reduce the revenue deficit to 0%, it essentially means whatever expenditures you are incurring under the revenue head, for that sufficient receipts are there under the revenue head itself. The amount of money that you are earning under the revenue side of the budget, it is sufficient to take care of expenditures under the revenue side of the budget. So that's the reason RD was targeted at 0 and FD at 3%. Later on, we started implementing these reforms and we were on the path to achieve these targets. But because of the global financial crisis, we had to do away with the target. We had to expand the targets. And after that, the Government of India set up NK Singh Review Committee. Government of India set up NK Singh Review Committee. It is also referred to as FRBM Review Committee. Now, the recommendations of the FRBM Review Committee, main important recommendations were: 1. Rather than targeting fiscal deficit and revenue deficit only, rather than having only these two targets, now we need to target even the public debt. We need to target even the public debt. That is essentially, the committee recommended that we should reduce the public debt of the Government of India to 40% of GDP, and of the states we should reduce the debt. For the states, we should reduce the debt to 20% of GDP. Essentially, the overall debt, the center as well as the states, the overall debt should be reduced to 60% of GDP. We should reduce the overall debt to 60% of GDP. This was one of the most important recommendations of the NK Singh FRBM Review Committee, which was accepted. In fact, the FRBM law was amended by the government, and starting 2018, Government of India introduced even this public debt as a target. In addition to this, as usual, the fiscal deficit as well as the revenue deficit targets were also kept. In fact, the committee recommended that over a period of time, how much should be the reduction? They gave a pathway. They basically recommended from 1 year to the next year, how much should be the reduction in case of the debt of the central government, how much should be the reduction in the RD revenue deficit as well as fiscal deficit. According to the recommendations, by 2023, the debt of the central government should have been brought down to 38.7% of GDP. Revenue deficit should have been dragged down to 0.8% of GDP, and the fiscal deficit should have been brought down to 2.5% of GDP. But because of the pandemic, the Government of India went for expansionary policy. The Government of India adopted expansionary policies. That is essentially, the government followed the concept of counter-cyclical policy, where lot of expenditure was done. And because of higher expenditure on one side and lesser amount of incomes being collected because of the pandemic, the debt of the government ballooned. The fiscal deficit and the revenue deficit also ballooned. And right now, the Government of India is trying to implement various policies using which we are trying to bring down all the three parameters under control. Now, what is being discussed in the article related to all of this? The article simply mentions that in the recently presented budget, the finance minister stated that we will reduce the fiscal deficit to 4.5% of GDP in the next financial year. That is, in the financial year 25 and 26, the fiscal deficit target will be 4.5%. And for the current financial year, that is financial year 25, the fiscal deficit target has been set at 4.9%. And not only this, the finance minister also made an announcement saying that after financial year 26, that is starting from 26 and 27, the Government of India, rather than having targets like this, and that's a common practice by the way, rather than having targets as to how much should be reduced from 1 year to next year, what should be the, right, let's say the debt target for the next financial year after 26 and 27, the government of India will most probably do away with the targets, and rather the finance minister stated that the fiscal deficit from 26 and 27 will be maintained in such a way that the debt as a percentage of GDP, I repeat, the debt as a percentage of GDP will keep on reducing. So, I hope you understand the shift in the policy making now. Rather than making targets for every year, finance minister simply is saying that we will ensure the amount of borrowings that we do, we will ensure that the debt to GDP ratio will always keep on reducing. That was the announcement done, and these two authors are warning against such policy making. What is the issue here? Let's understand this. If you want to reduce the debt to GDP ratio, if you want to control the debt to GDP ratio, the logic is very simple. We need to reduce the fiscal deficit to GDP ratio as well. That is essentially, how much is my borrowing annually? Fiscal deficit and debt, both are different things. Please be very careful. Fiscal deficit represents how much is the money that you borrow in a financial year. How much money are you borrowing in 24 and 25? That's a fiscal deficit of 25. How much money you have borrowed in 23 and 24? That is that year's fiscal deficit. So, every year how much you borrow, that is called as a fiscal deficit of that respective year. So, fiscal deficit to GDP ratio, if you keep it under control and if you keep on reducing it from one year to the next year, automatically the debt to GDP ratio will also keep on becoming lower and lower. That is a very simple CSAT related concept here. But the concern which has been raised by the authors is, one, why is the government of India doing away with the practice of having targets every year and trying to reach the targets through their policy making? I hope you understand this. Rather than simply giving a generalist statement saying that we will reduce the debt to GDP ratio, why can't government of India simply make targets? And again, all of this discussion is based on what has been announced by the finance minister in the recently presented budget. It is based on that. So, point number one. Point number two, if the central government will do away with this kind of a practice of having annual targets, can the same be followed by the state governments as well? Because every state government has their own fiscal responsibility piece of law. FRL, fiscal responsibility legislations. And this was there in a very important current affairs concept, that is the friction between the state government of Kerala versus the central government, where state governments such as Kerala, they are saying that we have our own laws regarding fiscal responsibility. How can central government impose restriction on our borrowing? So, that was the context. So, come back to the discussion here. So, if the central government does away with this kind of a practice, can the state governments also follow the practice? And if the state governments will also start following the practice, then does it mean that we are doing away with the recommendations of NK Singh Review Committee that we have implemented? And that is very relevant. Why? If you simply say we will control the fiscal deficit, understand this carefully. If the center simply says we will keep a tab on the fiscal deficit, as a result of which the fiscal deficit to GDP ratio will be controlled and the debt to GDP ratio also will be controlled, there are certain implications. What are the implications? Point number one, if the government of India will decide to keep the fiscal deficit, let us say at 3%, right, or let us take the 26 and the 25 and 26 target, that is a 4.5%. Okay, let us say 4.5%. Now, the states will also, let us say hypothetically, bring their fiscal deficit down to 3%. So, overall fiscal deficit in India will be 4.5% plus 3%, that will be 7.5%. Now, what is the implication? What is the importance of this? Listen to me very carefully. Overall 7.5% fiscal deficit essentially means this 7.5% of GDP will be the amount of money that will be borrowed by the central government and the state governments put together. All of you able to understand? If I just want to make it much more simple to you, imagine if the GDP is 100 CR and if I say fiscal deficit is 7.5% of this GDP, it essentially means this year the borrowing from the market is 7.5 CR. And what is the problem with this number? If you want to borrow 7.5 CR, you will have to borrow essentially from the market where there is a supply of surplus funding. That is, in a nutshell, the process of borrowing is done this way. On one side we have households. The households will earn income and part of the income will become basically investment, which is called as financial savings. Correct? It will become financial savings. And it is this financial savings which is tapped, which is basically borrowed in the market by different types of borrowers such as government as well as private sector. So, the borrower can be the government who will issue, let us say, government bond and borrow, and it can also be the private sector who will try to tap this kind of a financial savings of the households. Now, listen to me carefully. The financial savings of the households have actually declined in recent years. At one point of time, that is before the pandemic, the financial savings was somewhere around 7.6% of GDP, and because of the pandemic as well as increasing debt of the households, higher inflation which is eating away or which has led to higher expenditure of the households, etc., the latest data shows that financial savings has declined to 5.3% of GDP. 5.3% of GDP. And if you include, let us say, how much funds are coming into India in the form of foreign investments, how much money is coming into India, the net foreign investments that is flowing into India comes out to be somewhere around 2% of GDP. 2% of GDP. So, now just put together both of these points, 5.3% from the households and 2% from the foreign market. So, total amount of money that is available for borrowing purposes, because this is investment. So, the total amount of money which can be tapped by the government as well as from the private sector comes out to be 7.3%. Now, if you remember the earlier calculation that I did, the total fiscal deficit of the center plus state will become 7.5%. Now, are you able to understand this? If the borrowing is 7.5% of GDP, does it not mean that the center plus states put together, they will corner whatever is the total amount of investments in India in the form of the net savings, net foreign investments plus household savings. So, the center plus state will simply corner all of this money. Now, if the center plus state will corner this amount of money, what do you think will happen to private sector investment then? Private sector also wants to borrow from the market. But if the savings or the investments in the market are cornered by the center plus state, essentially the private sector will find it very difficult to borrow, raise funding. And as such, already one of the criticisms against the policy of government of India is the concept of crowding out. Please remember this. There is a term called as crowding out. What do you mean by crowding out? Right, crowding out essentially means with the higher deficit of government of India, they will try to borrow more money from the market. And when the government borrows more money from the market, the demand for the money will start increasing. And when the demand increases, interest rates will increase. And when the interest rates will increase, automatically it will hinder borrowings from the private sector. If I am a private sector company, I want to borrow money, but compared to earlier situation, now interest rates in the market have increased because of higher fiscal deficit of government of India. So, there is already a criticism that the government borrowings are actually leading to crowding out in the market. Now, in addition to this, if the center will simply not stick to any of these targets and simply say we will reduce fiscal deficit and we will reduce the debt to GDP ratio over a period of time, then these kind of events might become a common occurrence. And if this becomes common, then there is no point in promoting private sector investment. because the private sector anyways will find it very difficult to borrow from the market at a higher rate of interest. They might be forced to borrow from the external market, and if they borrow from external market, they will face issues such as exchange rate volatility, wherein they borrow when the exchange rate is in their favor, rupee is stronger compared to, let's say, dollar, and they will repay the money when the rupee has lost value against the dollar. So exchange rate volatility is there. Limitations are there whenever they borrow in terms of quantity they are allowed to borrow, etc., etc. So these are certain important points which have been mentioned in the article here. In addition to this, the authors also talk about sustainable debt as well as fiscal deficit. Why so? Listen to this. If Government of India borrows, it will have to pay interest on the borrowing. Correct? It has to pay interest on the borrowing. Now, the amount of interest that the government pays should be limited from 1 year to the next year as well. Because if you look at the budget documents, you will see that around 20%, I am rounding off the number, around 20% of the overall expenditure that is incurred by the government, it is essentially in the form of interest payment. It is in the form of interest payment. And if you calculate how much is this money out of the total revenue receipts, because I hope you understand, interest payments are part of the revenue account under the budget. Interest payments are part of the revenue expenditure side. So if you basically calculate this, take this number and calculate out of total revenue receipt, how much is this amount? In the recent times, the number has actually increased. Couple of years ago, it used to account for around 35% of the total revenue receipts, and now this has actually increased to 38.4% of the revenue receipt. Now, what is the implication? What is the meaning of it? Point number one, if you compare this with many other countries, that is the interest payment as a percentage of the total revenue receipt. If you compare this particular ratio, India's ratio is much higher compared to many other countries, and the problem factor here is, in case of other countries, they have much higher debt compared to India. And the importance of this parameter is that if more and more money out of the revenue receipt, if you use it for interest payment, then essentially it means you will be left out with lesser amount of money for other purposes within the revenue expenditure. Within the revenue expenditure, you will be left out with lesser and lesser amount of money. So Government of India needs to target this as well and improve the prudence of the finances over a period of time. So these are certain very important points which are mentioned in the article. I hope you have understood this, because a lot of technical language has been used in the article, but if you have understood the basics, the static portion, understanding this article to a certain extent will become easier. Now, based on this, I have given you an assignment here, mains answer writing assignment number 16, but I will help you out here. I will help you out. Discuss the challenges and the reforms implemented by the Indian government to make the budgeting policy effective and prudent. 15 marker question for 250 words. Start with an introduction. What is the policy making, or let's say the fiscal policy making importance for the government as well as economy? That should be your introduction. Please do not waste too many words in writing an introduction itself. You might know too much of information. Limit it to around 20 to 25 words. Come to the main body. What are the challenges? What are the challenges of Government of India in making the budget or budgeting as well as fiscal prudence? First, the fiscal deficit as well as revenue deficits are very, very high. Containing that is a challenge. Second one is controlling populism is also a very important challenge for the government. Many of the state governments are trying to control their populistic tendencies now. For example, the state of Himachal Pradesh. Very recently, we had a discussion on that. It is trying to control the amount of subsidy expenditure that the state government is incurring. And day for yesterday, the state government of Punjab also announced certain reforms where they want to control the amount of subsidy outlay, where they want to control the expenditure incurred by the state government, etc. So controlling populist tendencies is also a challenge. Providing welfareism, that is essentially, please understand, populism can be one part of welfareism, but providing welfareism, that is truly providing welfare to the people in the form of healthcare facilities, in the form of education, in the form of housing, etc., etc., that is also going to add to the deficits of the government. That's also a challenge. And rising interest rates, crowding out, rising interest rates or crowding out is also a challenge for the government of India. In addition to this, there are various external parameters or external factors which will impose a bigger challenge for the government. For example, Russia-Ukraine war has led to higher market prices of many of these inputs. And in many of these inputs, such as fertilizer, the government provides a lot of subsidies. How do you contain that? That's a challenge. So these are the challenges. And what are the reforms which have been implemented by the government to address the challenges? For example, direct benefit transfer. For example, the public financial management system, PFMS. For example, just in time, JIT, just in time, and the single nodal agency system which has been implemented by the government to make the flow of the funds much more efficient. So these are some of the reforms that you can quote and basically wind up the answer, conclude the answer by saying that many more reforms are needed to make the process of budgeting much more efficient and to ensure there is a fiscal prudence for a longer duration under the government of India. Done. So this is one assignment, try it out. So MCQ assignment number 22, how many of the following are included in calculating the total liabilities of central government? There are 3 parameters here. What is the right answer? Please do let me know in the comment section. And if you want to know the key answer or the right answer to this question, please do attend tomorrow's session, which I am taking, where I will discuss the answer to this. Now, earlier MCQ assignments, number 20, consider the following statements regarding fertilizers. Subsidies on fertilizers is administered by the Minister of Agriculture? No, it is administered by the Minister of Chemicals and Fertilizers. India produces urea, MOP and DAP. However, the production falls short of the demand for all the 3. My dear, in case of MOP, there is no production of it. All of it is imported into India. Second is also wrong. Third one, IFFCO is a cooperative and it is the first in the world to produce liquid urea or the nano urea. Yes, third statement is correct. Right option will be option A, only one is correct. Next, MCQ assignment number 21, consider the following statements regarding GST. All the indirect taxes and cesses have been subsumed under GST. Absolutely no. Even today, lot of these indirect taxes, best example, the VAT that was increased by the state government of Punjab very recently on fuels such as petrol and diesel, that is an indirect tax. It is not under the GST or there is no GST as of now. To be very technically correct, it is already under GST, but there is no announcement of GST. But other commodities, for example, alcoholic commodities for human consumption, that is not yet under the GST. Second, Centre is providing the GST compensation to the states until 2026. No, it has already been discontinued after 5 years of implementation of GST, that is from 2022. Third one, GST is a destination based tax. Yes, one of the very important features of GST is that it is a destination based tax. That is, the tax component for the state government is given to the state where the consumption of the good happens or a service happens. Right option will be option A, only one is correct. Let me go to the next article, again the editorial, a tourism policy ill suited for Jammu and Kashmir. What is the discussion here? Listen to me carefully. Essentially, the discussion that has happened in this editorial is economy versus environment. Protection of the environment or promotion of economy, generating revenues. That is a discussion essentially here. Although the article discusses only one aspect of it, that is the ecology and environmental protection requirement, let me give you the comparison here. Listen to me carefully. Jammu and Kashmir is a union territory, and by the virtue of being a union territory and having a legislative there, the budget was announced. The government there announced a budget, And according to the budgetary documents, listen to me now, the amount of the fiscal deficit of the state government, I will write FD here, the fiscal deficit of the state government is really very high. According to the budget documents for financial year 23 and 24, the fiscal deficit target was around 3,100 crore rupees. Around, don't worry about the exact number. But by the end of the financial year, the fiscal deficit of the state government was more than 13,000 crore rupees. Was more than 13,000 crore rupees. That is almost 3 times more than what was budgeted. Point number 1. And what is the importance of this? First one, it is more and more dependent on the financial assistance of the center. It is highly dependent on the financial assistance from the center. Lot of funds will keep on flowing from the center to the union territory. Point number 2, it also indicates the weakness of the finances of the state and also a need to generate lot of revenues from whatever sources are possible. And that is where the services sector becomes so important for Jammu and Kashmir. That's the reason why services sector becomes so very important. Because mind you, around 2/3 of the total gross value addition, 2/3 of total gross value addition of the economy for Jammu and Kashmir comes from services sector. And not just this, around 31% of the working population in India, that is around 31% of the employed population in Jammu and Kashmir, not in India, in Jammu and Kashmir is employed in the services sector. So, service sector is very important. Now, how can you leverage the services sector to improve the financial position of the state? That is where the tourism sector becomes so important. The tourism sectors becomes so important. After the policy which was announced by the government back in the year 2020, tourism policy, to promote tourism in the state, there is a huge influx, there is a huge inflow of tourists visiting Jammu and Kashmir. According to various estimates, in the last 1 year, more than 2 crore tourists have visited Jammu and Kashmir. And post 2020 policy announcement by the state, that is the policy of 2020 to promote tourism, more than 4 crore visitors have gone to Jammu and Kashmir, that is tourist. And when the tourists will keep on coming into a particular state, they will keep on visiting a particular region, automatically it will lead to lot of economic activity in that region. It will lead to lot of economic activity. For example, demand for the services such as food service, restaurant, hotel, traveling, transportation, staying, etc. all the demands will start increasing. At the same point of time, with higher demand for services, there will be lot of employment generation. Employment generation will also take place. In addition to this, there will be lot of investment that is going to take place in the region, and the contribution to all of this to household incomes, to the GDP, etc. will start increasing. So, this is one side of the argument. This is actually happening in the Jammu and Kashmir, and this is one side of the argument, and the author gives the other side of the argument now. Right? Please understand all of these points. The author says there is a certain environmental cost that the state has to pay. What are the reasons, what are the causes, what are the concerns here? Point number 1, whenever lot of tourism will start entering into a particular region, it's true that lot of infrastructure will be developed. But with that, what if this infrastructure is developed? As a result of this, there will be deforestation that is conducted. There will be lot of deforestation that is going to happen. And one of the outcomes of deforestation, we have very recently seen what an event such as a deforestation can do to a region such as Wayanad. Right? So, I hope you understand deforestation. It will increase the possibilities of disasters in the later duration. And as such, the value of Jammu and Kashmir, there is already a concern that it is a seismically active zone. It is a zone where earthquakes can keep on happening. It's already a concern. And in the last decade, there was a flood also back in the 2014, which ravaged a lot of infrastructure, put the population through lot of hardships when the floods happened back in the year 2014. So, first one is deforestation. Second one is regulation. Where is the regulation? Whether the infrastructure that is being developed, is it being developed according to the guidelines? Are they simply cutting down the trees without following the guidelines? Are they simply drawing lot of water from the underground without meeting any of the conditions? Are they developing the quality infrastructure or not? Regulations might also be relaxed, or regulations might be ignored by lot of participants here. That is another concern. With more and more inflow of the tourists, the demand for water will start increasing. That is very natural. The consumption and the demand for water will start increasing. And the concern already with respect to agriculture sector. Remember this, the Jammu and Kashmir agriculture sector has the highest number of employees. So, with more and more tourists entering into Jammu and Kashmir, the demand for water has increased, and the availability of water for agriculture sector as such is already low. Now, there is a concern that there will not be sufficient water even for cultivation purposes. Even for cultivation purposes, we may not have sufficient quantity of water, which will have a huge impact on the agriculture production as well as large number of households which are dependent on the agriculture sector for their day-to-day sustenance. In addition to this, fourth very important consequence related to the tourism is the pollution. The pollution, the number of people who will be visiting these cities, it is more than what the infrastructure in the city can actually handle. The amount of garbage that will be created, amount of plastic waste that could be created, all of this will have an impact on the ecology and environment. All of this will have a huge impact on ecology and environment. And that is the reason the article basically makes a conclusion saying that there is a need to have a fine balance. There is a need to have a fine balance between promoting tourism as well as protecting the environment of a precious place, a very, very precious place which is considered to be heaven on the earth, such as Jammu and Kashmir. Done. So, these are certain points, but again please understand, the author mainly talks about the environmental impact, but you should also know what are the economical arguments in terms of economy related to promotion of tourism. Now, next article, Center has approved new treatment regimen for multi-drug resistant TB. Now, what is this new regimen? Please memorize this. The new regimen is referred to as BPALM, BPALM, BPALM. The BPALM essentially refers to 4 components in this regimen, that is the medicines. One is bedaquiline, pretomanid, linezolid and moxifloxacin. These are the 4 components or the 4 types of medicines which will be provided under this new regimen to treat the TB in case of India. And as such, this new regimen, although it has been introduced very newly in India, has been approved by the Ministry of Health very, very recently. Please remember, the World Health Organization, the WHO has already approved this treatment regimen back in the year 2022 itself. Back in the year 2022 itself, this regimen was approved by World Health Organization. Now, what are the important points? Listen to me carefully. Point number 1, India houses around 1/4 of the total number of TB cases around the world, and this is according to WHO guideline or WHO reports. It houses around 1/4 of total number of TB cases, right, globally. Point number 2, although under the SDG, Sustainable Development Goals, although under this, the target for eliminating TB is 2030, Government of India has preponed the target to 2025. And not just recently also, but historically, over decades now, Government of India has been implementing multiple reforms, multiple policies in order to address the TB cases in India. Now, one of the issues that the Government of India has been facing regarding eliminating TB is that the TB now has become multi-drug resistant, MDR, multi-drug resistant. Essentially, the strains of the TB, that is bacteria essentially, they have grown more and more resistant to the kind of medicines that the patients are taking. And this generally happens because the patients do not completely finish the regimen, which is for a longer duration. They will stop it midway, and as a result of this, the bacteria which cause TB have become resistant to the drugs. Now, because of this, right now for treatment of TB, there are two different regimens which are used. In case of the first regimen, please understand, around 13 to 14 tablets are given every day to the patient, and this has to be continued to 9 to 11 months. This has to be provided for a duration of 9 to 11 months. There is also one more regimen wherein around the tablets which are provided will be 4 to 5 tablets, but this will be provided for a duration of around 18 to 24 months. Look at the duration, 18 to 24 months. Now, because the duration is very high, the pricing of the medicines is also on a higher side. Generally what happens is, there are lot of cases where in between the patients will stop taking the treatment. This will further complicate the issue. Second one, whenever these many tablets or the let's say medicines are consumed on day-to-day basis by the patients, there have been found to be certain side effects as well. In lot of cases, there have been side effects because of consuming of so many tablets on day-to-day basis. So, Government of India now has basically approved the new drug regimen, the BPAM regimen, where 4 combinations or let's say 4 types of drugs are provided, and please understand the points now. This will be providing the treatment, and the reduction of the time period will take place now. The regimen will be done for 6 months now. Have a look at this. The regimen will reduce basically the time period for the treatment from around 18 to 24 months now, which is around 18 to 24 months. Now, this will be reduced to 6 months. That is a first very important point. Second very important point regarding the in favor of this regimen is that in case of the treatment, the side effects are very, very low, and the success rates are also very, very high. Success rates of treating TB using these kinds of drugs is also very high. And the point number 3, already mentioned, success rates very high and side effects very low. And the point number 3 will be in terms of costing. In terms of costing, compared to the earlier regime, the cost of consuming this or taking this kind of a medication is very, very low. In fact, various surveys which have been conducted over a period of time says that if all the countries around the world, and as such please remember, more than 80 countries already have shifted to this methodology of combination of 4 drugs. It is already more than 80 countries have shifted. So, if all the countries around the world will shift to this kind of regimen, the overall savings around the world will be more than 6,000 crore rupees. More than 6,000 crore rupees can be saved if you shift to this kind of a 4 drug combination regime. So, these are certain very important points in the context of Government of India approving new treatment for tuberculosis. Please be very careful. The bacterial diseases and the viral diseases, in the last 4 to 5 months, lot of articles have been appearing in the Hindu newspaper. Please make a note of all of these questions. Probability of questions being asked on one of these is very, very high now. Okay. Next, permit real growth, avoid China's EV colony tag. A paper has been prepared now, or survey has been conducted, and the GTRI, Global Trade Research Initiative or Global Trade Research Institute, has come out with a finding which says you should permit real growth in the EV sector in India. And in the last couple of days, lot of interesting arguments are happening in the context of EV, that is electric vehicles. Point number 1, the Minister for Heavy Industries, Mr. H.D. Kumaraswamy, couple of days ago announced that Government of India is almost ready with the FAME 3 initiative. It is almost finalizing the FAME 3 initiative, and in the next couple of months it will be announced. And this is important for a very simple reason. The government earlier announced a FAME 1 initiative. After that, they announced a FAME 2 initiative. and after that they announced EMPS initiative, that is respectively I will talk now. FAME 1 was implemented from 2015 to 2019 till 2019, and FAME 2 was implemented from 2019 to 2024, and the EMPS Electronic Mobility Promotion Scheme was announced very recently by the Government of India, the application of which has been extended till the end of September. Till the end of September 2024, the application of the scheme has been extended. In that discussion or in that context, the minister announced that government is almost ready with the FAME 3 policy and it will be announced very soon. That was the first point of discussion. Second point of discussion, Mr. Nitin Gadkari, the Minister for Highways, Roadways in India, Mr. Nitin Gadkari day before yesterday has given a speech where he has criticized the idea of continuing the subsidies for the electric vehicles and has argued for opening up the market and no continuation of subsidies should be done for electric vehicles. What were the arguments which were put forward by Mr. Nitin Gadkari? Simple. Point number 1, there is no need to provide or continue the electric vehicle subsidies in case of India for a simple reason, right? Understand this. Point number 1, the cost of lithium ion batteries has actually come down in the last 1 decade. The cost of lithium ion batteries back in the year 2015 was very, very high, and now over a decade, in a span of a decade, it has come down. And he says in the next couple of years, next 2 to 3 years, the cost is further going to come down. So, no need to provide subsidies for the electric vehicle. Point number 2 is the electric vehicles, the GST rate earlier was 12% and now the GST rate has been reduced to 5%. You have already provided the benefit. And if you talk about, let us say, the other internal combustion engine vehicles, ICE, the GST rate applicable is 48%. Of course, I hope you understand, it will be 28%, the highest slab under GST plus cess, it will take it to 48%. So, as such, the electric vehicles already are at an advantageous position when you compare the GST rate, and that should sufficient to reduce the cost of the electric vehicles and ensure that these are comparable in terms of costing with the ICE vehicles. And point number 3, right, within this point number 3, Mr. Nitin Gadkari stated that the Indian consumers are already aware of what is the benefit of EV. The consumers are aware of it, and when the consumers are aware, they will automatically keep on opting for electric vehicles because they will consider the long term benefits, not the short term, but the long term benefits, that is the fuel savings in the longer duration will always be in favor of electric vehicles. So, citing these arguments, Mr. Nitin Gadkari stated that Government of India should not continue any kind of subsidies for electric vehicles. Now, today there is one more article in the business line, and that article talks about what are the recommendations from ASSOCHAM. What are the recommendations of ASSOCHAM? Right, ASSOCHAM, that is essentially a body, right? It's a trade body. ASSOCHAM says that Government of India should continue providing subsidies for the electric vehicles for the next 3 to 5 years. The Government of India should continue to provide the subsidies for the electric vehicles for at least next 3 to 5 years. And what is the argument that they have put forward? They say that producing electric vehicles is a very complicated concept. In essence, you require to produce a lot of components. You need lot of components. Rather than importing these components, now they need to be manufactured in India. They need to be manufactured in India, and for that the subsidies or incentives should be provided. The subsidies or incentives should be provided for promotion of the component manufacturing in India. Component manufacturing in India. And point number 3, the trade body says we need to provide certain subsidies for expanding charging infrastructure. We need to provide certain subsidies for expansion of charging infrastructure, because right now one of the limitations, one of the hindrances, whenever I want to purchase a EV or you want to purchase a EV, one of the hindrances will be we do not have sufficient charging infrastructure in India. Go out of the metro cities, go out of bigger cities, you will find it very difficult to get a charging port or charging infrastructure for your EV. That is holding back the sales of electric vehicles. So, these are the three very important articles in the context of electric vehicles which have appeared in the last couple of days, again only discussing one concept, EV. In addition to this, the GTRI says that Government of India should promote the growth in the electric vehicles so that India will become a producer of electric vehicles. By producing components, we will be able to become a major producer of electric vehicles over a period of time rather than simply importing and assembling in India. Done? Okay. Now, associated with this, there is an MCQ assignment number 23 for you. Consider the following statements about FAME initiative. It promotes the sale of the electric 2 vehicles and 3 vehicles only. GST on EV is currently 12%. There are conditions of localization under the scheme for getting incentives. 3 statements, how many of them are correct? Do let me know in the comment section. If not, attend the tomorrow session. Next article, judicial appointments, not the charter of a single judge, must be collaborative. What is the issue? What is the discussion all about? Simple. Please understand this. In terms of appointing judges to the Supreme Court as well as the High Court, there are articles in the Indian Constitution. There are articles. But much more importantly, because of various judgments of Supreme Court of India, we have set up a concept called as collegium system. We have a collegium system through which we will make appointments, we will give recommendations for appointments to the Supreme Court as well as High Court. In the earlier class, we had a discussion regarding the collegium for appointment or elevation to the Supreme Court of India. Now, yesterday, the Supreme Court of India has issued a judgment or orders regarding the concept of collegium in case of elevation to High Court judges. Right now, the process is very simple. Accordingly, if a High Court needs to be filled in terms of their vacancies, if there is need to fill with judges, the Chief Justice of the High Court will initiate the process, will have consultation with the judges, 2 senior most judges, and give the recommendation to the state government. State government will send it to the law ministry. Law ministry will submit the recommendation to the judiciary, that is the Supreme Court. Supreme Court collegium here will be a CJI plus 2 senior most judges. They will look at the recommendations and they will give their feedback whether these elevations must be done or not, and after that the President of India through a gazette will issue a notification or issue an order. In case of the Himachal Pradesh, High Court, back in the year 2022, there were 2 recommendations which were forwarded to the Supreme Court of India. Basically, the Chief Justice of Himachal Pradesh High Court gave a recommendation of 2 judges to be elevated as High Court judges of the Himachal Pradesh. Now, these recommendations through the process went to Supreme Court of India, and please remember, whenever these recommendations are given for elevations, there is a time limit which is prescribed for this. There is a time limit. Now, the Supreme Court of India withheld the elevation of these judges, but in the year 2024, the Supreme Court of India again sent a letter to the Himachal Pradesh High Court asking the Chief Justice to again have a relook and recommend people to be elevated, judges to be elevated as judges of High Court. Now, it is said that the Chief Justice of the High Court here did not consult the 2 other judges, that is a collegium. The Chief Justice here, without consulting, has given the reply to Supreme Court now and has simply stated, I recommend these 2 people to be elevated to become judges of the High Court here. And against these 2 new names, I hope you understand, against the 2 new names, the old recommended 2 judges or old recommendations of 2 people, they approached the Supreme Court. And their argument was very simple. Here is a Chief Justice of a High Court who has recommended 2 new names by surpassing us. Now, if you take the seniority, we are the senior most, and the Chief Justice has recommended other 2 people to be elevated to become the judges now, judges of the High Court, which essentially means our services are being ignored. We are senior most, we are being ignored, and because we are being ignored and somebody else would be appointed, it will become a blemish on the service, on my service in the High Court, in the judiciary. And the the Supreme Court now took up this issue, and they have said the 2-judge bench of Supreme Court has stated that whether the process is followed or not, I repeat, whether the process is followed or not will come under judicial review. Understand this, whether the process, whether it has been followed or not, that will come under the judicial review. The bench made it very clear. We are not talking anything about whether these 2 old people or these 2 people who were recommended earlier, whether they are eligible or not, we are not talking about it. We are not recommending that they are eligible, absolutely no. Our argument is there is a system. With the first judge's case, we implemented collegium system, that is back in the year 1993. And in the High Court, the collegium should be made up of the CJ as well as the 2 senior most judges. Here is the case where the Chief Justice has not taken the inputs from the remaining 2 senior most judges and instead individually has given the response to Supreme Court. Hence, the process has not been followed. Hence, this process will not be acted upon, or this recommendation shall not be acted upon. The Chief Justice now must consult the remaining 2 most senior most judges and based on that send the recommendation to Supreme Court. Right. So, this is basically the judgment or the order which has been issued by the Supreme Court now, important for a simple reason. So far, Supreme Court has never intervened through the bench order like this. Earlier, administrative orders were issued, but for the first time, Supreme Court in a judgment has issued an order how the process has to be followed, whether collegium must be followed or not, etc., etc. And they have said this will come under the judicial review as well now. Done? So, that is the importance of the judgment. Let me go to the next article. NTCA letter on relocation from tiger zones attracts criticism. What is the issue here? Whenever you talk about tiger reserves, the tiger reserve, if you assume, right, the reserve is in a circular shape like this, is generally divided into zones. The inner zone is called as a core zone. This is called as a core zone, and the outer, after the core zone, you will call this as a buffer zone. You will simply refer to this as buffer zone. And what is the importance of core zone and buffer zone? The National Tiger Conservation Authority, NTCA, which has been set up to implement the preservation or let us say conservation reforms of Government of India, that is Project Tiger by the way, will ensure that there is no human activity within the core zone. That is, imagine a core zone is there, we have identified certain region as a core zone and it is identified based on the density of the animals whom we want to protect and their presence in this region. So, imagine there is a core zone and if there is a tribal population in the core zone, they will be having, right, let us say places where they are located, they are staying there, they will be conducting certain activities such as a collection of certain forest products, hunting, etc. Now, once it is established that this is a core zone, the families will be relocated out of the core zone. You cannot be present, you cannot conduct hunting, you cannot conduct any kind of other activity, you cannot even reside within the core zone, because we want to protect the animals for which the tiger reserve has been announced. So, that is the basic argument here, and the NTCA says in 53 tiger zones now, in 53 the tiger reserves now, there are certain villages wherein even today within the core zone population is residing. Even right now the population is residing and this will hinder our activities, our preservation activities. And citing this, a letter has been shot by NTCA to all the states where the tiger, right, let's say conservation reforms or the measures are being implemented across multiple states. And they have been asked to take care of this and move the people out of the core zone. Now, against this, there is one more group which has criticized it. The argument of the opposition group is, how can you basically force the state governments to move the tribal population out of the core zone? How can you displace the population? And the issue that they have stated is, one, this tribal population, if you want to move them out, first you will have to talk to them, you will have to negotiate with them, and that is what the act also says. Try to provide with resettlement facilities and then try to move the population out of the core zone. You are not recommending all of it, rather you are simply recommending states take action and move the population out. And when you give these kind of orders or let us say the directives to the state government might simply throw all the provisions into the air, ignore all the other provisions and conduct certain activities, take certain procedures which are violating human rights. In multiple cases, it has been seen that the police force is taken to vacate this population. People are beaten, people are picked up into, right, let us say vans and moved out of these regions, etc., etc. And these kind of, let us say, policies or let us say the measures which have been taken by the state also has led to violence in these regions. So, the criticism has been levied against such an order issued by the NTCA, and the authorities or the activists are saying these kind of orders by the authority are violating the Land Acquisition Rehabilitation Resettlement Act. It is violating the Scheduled Caste and Scheduled Tribes Prevention of Atrocities Act, and it is in fact violating the provisions under Wildlife Protection Act itself. So, this is in a nutshell what has been given in the article regarding the letter issued. Next article, SME IPO Frenzy has continued with more than 50 filings for the month of August. Now, what is the issue here? Listen to me very carefully. In the stock market, the companies will list their shares whenever they do it for the first time. This is called as an IPO, initial public offering. Now, larger companies go for an IPO. Even the small and micro enterprises, SMEs, small and micro enterprises are also allowed to conduct an IPO. SEBI very recently has seen a concerning trend regarding SME IPOs, a concerning trend. What is a concerning trend? Lot of the small and micro enterprises, when they go for listing in the stock market, the demand for such shares is very, very high, unusually very, very high. And it has gone to such an extent that SEBI is concerned now, SEBI is worried. Why? Individual investors such as you and me may not understand what are the fundamentals of the market. And because the demand for such shares are increasing, we might end up investing in lot of these IPOs. And the problem is, in many of these IPOs of the SMEs, the companies are not very well established. The enterprises do not have a pan-India presence as well. They have very limited presence. For example, right, have a look at this interesting fact here. There was one SME IPO which was conducted for Entity Resourceful Automobiles, which is running 2 showrooms of Yamaha bikes, 2 showrooms, just 2 showrooms of Yamaha, right, products. And have a look at this, they have only 8 employees, 2 showrooms, 8 employees. And this SME went for an IPO and they wanted to sell shares of 12 crore rupees. They wanted to sell shares of 12 crore rupees through IPO. The demand for the shares, when the subscription took place, the demand for the shares was 4800 crore rupees. 4800 crore. So, you can imagine to what extent the demand for the shares or the subscription of the shares has happened here. And the SEBI as a regulator says it is a cause of concern, because many of these investors do not understand how the market is working. They are simply running behind these instruments in the market just to make gains in the short duration, just to earn lot of money in the short duration. A warning has been given by SEBI, but even after that, the article says more than 50 companies, that is SMEs, now have approached SEBI and they have said they will be conducting IPO in the coming days. So, that is a cause of concern again regarding the protection of investors, right, let us say especially the retail investors. Okay. Next article, a small article, shared ownership of protected monuments with Waqf board causes conflict, says ASI. What is the gist here? What is the importance? The government of India has proposed amending Waqf Act, and this bill which has been proposed to amend the earlier act, it has been referred to a joint parliamentary committee. Very recently, the 4th meeting of the joint parliamentary committee took place, and in the meeting, the senior officials of ASI represented certain viewpoints, gave certain inputs for, right, let us say the committee. What were their arguments? What were the points put forward by these authorities? Point number 1, many of these, right, monuments which have been identified by the ASI for maintenance, they have been claimed as Waqf properties later. They have announced that this is a national monument, we will protect, ASI says that, and after certain time period, the Waqf board basically comes forward and says, under the act, we have these documents and these properties will come under our ownership, we will maintain them. And this kind of a dual control is a problem. It leads to a lot of frictions. How so? The ASI will appoint or basically authorize, give license for certain guides. Now, it says even the Waqf board in certain cases, they are removing these guides who have been appointed by ASI and they are appointing their own guides. That is going to lead to a conflict. In certain cases, ASI wants to enter the property here, that is a national monument, and conduct a certain maintenance operations, but the Waqf holds them, does not allow them to enter into such properties. In certain monuments, it has been seen that the Waqf board itself has conducted certain operations. They have made certain repairs, etc., by themselves. ASI simply says this is this is against the idea of protecting the monument. This will basically destroy the originality of the monument, etc. So, these are some of the points of friction that have been raised by the Archaeological Survey of India against, right, the concept of the Waqf property in India, especially related to national monuments, and it has stated that there is a need to make certain changes so that these kind of overlapping of ownership or let us say the regulatory authority will be reduced. Okay. Last article for today, Sensex falls 1.2% as FPIs offload stocks. Some of you will be of the opinion, sir, Sensex will keep on rising and falling every day. What is the importance of the article? My dear, listen to me carefully. The Sensex has taken a hit yesterday for two predominant reasons. Not only Sensex, even Nifty. Two predominant reasons. That is, what would be the data for labor in USA? What would be the jobs data for the month of August in USA? And today the data has come out and the data is basically mixed. It has a mixed signals for USA because there is a rising concern that USA might be entering into recession. And the jobs data says for the month of August, USA has produced 1.4 lakh jobs. But no doubt the jobs are good compared to last month, which was 89,000. The jobs data is good. Unemployment rate has come down. But the concerning factor which the jobs data throws up again is that hiring process, the growth rate of hiring is coming down. That is a cause of concern now. Please remember. So, worried about what would be the jobs data for USA, there was a lot of selling yesterday in the FPI, in the equity market by FPI. Second very important point, there is a new guideline which was announced by the SEBI market regulator last year in the month of August. It came into force in the month of November and the application of that has been extended, right, until this month. That is basically till the 9th of the September. What is this guideline? There is a guideline regarding beneficial ownership. Understand this. Beneficial ownership guideline. Under beneficial ownership, in order to ensure there is a transparency, there is no stock market manipulation by many investors like this. SEBI says if an FPI has total investments about 25,000 crore rupees in the equity market in India, then granular details has to be provided. Granular simply means, right, every detail of who is the owner, who is having stake in the FPI, who has a management control over it, all these details will have to be submitted. Now, what if you are an FPI who do not want to submit all of this data? SEBI has said you will have to reduce your equity then. Reduce your holdings in the equity, start selling off then. And that is the precise reason the holdings of FPIs before 9th, those who do not want to come under the regulation, they have started selling it in the market. So, two characteristics or two parameters. One, if your equity holdings is more than 25,000 crores, then give the granular details. And one more condition, right, or there is one more condition, or if you have more than 50% of your equity holdings in one corporate group, I repeat, if more than 50% of your equity holdings are there in one corporate group, then also you will have to give granular details regarding the ownership, management, etc. to SEBI. So, worried about these kind of guidelines, and because the 9th September is the due date, after that, what will happen after 9th? After 9th, if you sell the equity in the market and earn money, 5% of that you will have to pay to SEBI in the form of penalty. So, because of these two reasons, yesterday there was a lot of selling in the equity market by FPIs. Result of this is a drop in the Nifty as well as Sensex when the day ended. Done? So, these are the various articles, important articles as well as the concepts related to articles that I wanted to discuss today, dated, newspaper dated 7th September 2024. Before I wind up the discussion, please understand, I have tried to take articles from different, let us say, subjects spanning from S&T to polity to economy to ensure that your preparation is very comprehensive to cover all the relevant current affairs and to make this initiative a one-stop destination for all of you. So, if you like this initiative, hit the like button, and if you are yet to subscribe to our YouTube channel, kindly do subscribe right now. And second, much more important, starting today, we are launching the SIP. Please do log on to the website or the platform, register there and start attending these tests, which is going to help you in clearing or acing the upcoming civil services examination. That's it from my side. See you tomorrow sharp at 10 a.m. Have a great day.